I'm really happy to introduce Ann-Sofi Korbo, who is, to my understanding, the best expert in the global LNG. And so today we have not just a presentation on LNG, we have a book presentation. And this is, I mean, this is something. So poor Ann-Sofi had to carry this big book here from Riyadh, from Amsterdam. And it is really an enormous work of the whole group of experts from all over the world, led by Ann-Sofi and Jonathan Stern. Yeah, and it took you, how much, maybe 2 years. Yeah, so you can imagine that's a result of a lot of work, a lot of knowledge, and I really feel very much inspired by the idea that now you will have access to all this source of knowledge. Ann-Sofi is very well known in the gas world. She has worked at IHS Sierra in gas division, and then she has led a well-known medium-term gas outlook in the International Energy Agency, and I'm sure all of you who deal with gas have at least once seen this report. And now she's working at KAPSARC, King's Abdullah Petroleum Research Center in Riyadh, also leading gas program. So that's a whole life devoted to gas, and the depth of her knowledge, that's something incredible. So I'm really feeling a bit jealous for you. And now I'm happy to give the word to Ann-Sofi to make her presentation. Please prepare your questions, and then you will have an opportunity to ask them. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana. Spasiba. Mnogo vážení, dámy gospoda, k сожалению, я говорю очень плохо по-русски, so я буду говорить по-английски. My presentation today is indeed going to about the LNG market and a book that we have been working upon with the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies for about 2 years. It was definitely a group effort. We had 13 people working on that book, people coming from different backgrounds, from different institutes, a lot of British people coming from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, people also coming from the US. We had our technical expert, Chris Caswell, who has done a terrific technical appendix. We had experts on Latin America, on the Middle East, on Asia, on liquefaction, regasification. So it was really a great experience to work with all these people. Now, it was also a very interesting story, because when we started actually working on that book, it was the middle of 2014. And the middle of 2014, if you remember correctly, we had high gas prices and high oil prices. Oil prices were at about $100 per barrel. We had also already a lot of LNG capacity, which was under construction, about 100 MTPA. Only one US LNG project at that time was under construction. But people were very, very positive about the growth of the LNG market, in particular in Asia, which was seen as a very important growing market. Then 2 years later, when we were finalizing the book, well, the picture looked a little bit different. Prices were much, much lower, between $45 and $50 per barrel. We had gas prices also globally at much lower level, about $5 to $6 per MMBTU in Asia, about the same levels in Europe. And also, I mean, there had been very few FIDs taken in 2016, and people were really wondering, since the Asian gas market and LNG markets were not growing that fast, I mean, where are we going and who is going to take FID going forward? Now that, I mean, we are a little bit later, almost 1 year later, where are we now? Well, what we can see is that already we are in the middle of this expansion of LNG, which is coming to the market. We have already 4 projects in Australia which are up and running. We have 1 project in the US, Sabine Pass, which is already pretty much engaged. Not all the trains are operating, but already 3 trains are operating, and they are operating very well. We have the first FLNG, which has just commissioned its first cargo. So this new development, and it's not Prelude, it's a canoe project in Malaysia, which is up and running, and we had also one project in Indonesia. So we are quite advanced in terms of additional LNG capacity. However, the additional LNG supply is growing not that fast. I mean, we had only plus 17 MTPA of additional LNG supply in 2016. A lot of problems with the new LNG capacity coming online, also some issues with the existing LNG plants. Sailors right now, they are facing a buyer's market. So they are very much looking at new buyers, new countries which will be willing to import LNG. And we are finding a lot of these new countries. We have Jamaica, we have Gibraltar, we have Malta, with Ivory Coast and other countries potentially looking also at importing LNG. Prices, however, are still relatively low. We had a spike in $10 per MMBTU during the winter, but we are still looking at relatively low gas prices. And now, well, the thing is, what is going to happen? Who is going to take FID? We have a lot of new potential markets, but very small markets. And what we are also seeing is that the markets and the buyers are a little bit reluctant to commit for 20 years, because 20 years is a long period. So the period of the utilities in Japan, in Europe, in Korea, which were ready to commit for 20 years, it's kind of over. And this is putting a big question mark for the financing of the new projects. So are we moving towards a great reconfiguration, as it was the title of the book, for the LNG market? Well, it's very important to understand that over the past 53 years now, because the first LNG exports were in 1964, the global LNG industry has evolved a lot. I like to describe it as a little basket of kittens, because this is very much what the LNG industry was at the very beginning. I mean, you had probably between the buyers and the sellers as many people or slightly more as we have today in this room. People knew each other very well. Now, you are going to the LNG conference, and you see a lot of new people coming from China, a lot of new different buyers, coming new trading houses. You have the Trafigura, the Gunvor, the Vitol, all the traders who want to participate. You also have companies which are never invested before in LNG. You have, for example, we are talking about this company, Ophir, which has which is developing an FLNG in Equatorial Guinea. And Ophir is going to partner with Golar and Schlumberger. I mean, Schlumberger is a service company. So a lot of new entrants. The picture of the LNG industry is completely changing. But for all these people, there is a fundamental question, which is, where is LNG demand heading? And what we have done in the book is that everybody was tasked with a specific region and trying to come up with different natural gas and LNG demand forecasts for all these regions. So we have added together the most pessimistic cases and the most optimistic cases together. So this may not reflect actually the final outcome. It's mostly reflecting the maximum ranges between minimum demand and maximum LNG demand. But you can see that, I mean, by 2030, I mean, there is, if you are looking at actually the lowest case for Europe, so you are excluding this European high case, you are looking at pretty much almost a 200 MTPA difference between the lowest case and the highest case. There is a lot of variations depending on the region, but there is also a lot of variations depending on the whole of Europe, which is very much a sunk market for additional LNG. What we have not included here is the potential for the transport sector, because I mean, this is something different that is or is not exactly part of the total LNG demand, but it's definitely something very important. I'm going to focus on some specific countries and regions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you have questions, I can answer the different questions. So, of course, as the main market for LNG is and remains Asia. And when I am talking about Asia, I am talking about not only Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, but I'm also talking about China, India, and all the Southeast Asian countries. But what is very important to understand is that because of the current market conditions, because this is a buyer's market. Because prices are very low and also LNG has become more flexible, you have a lot of additional countries which are suddenly becoming interested in LNG. I mean, Africa, you see, this country, Egypt, has started importing in 2015, but you have Morocco, you have potentially Senegal, here a lot of West African countries, Namibia and South Africa, potentially Kenya. Also here in Asia, we have some countries which are interested in LNG. So definitely the number of countries which is becoming interested in LNG is growing. But as I said, I mean, the main market is and remains Asia. Not only our traditional LNG buyers, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, which are still representing the bulk of imports in both cases, but what we are also seeing is that China and India are growing with a lot of uncertainties, and you have also a stack of new LNG importers here, which are already present but will be growing. However, I mean, the difference between the low case and the high case is pretty much as 100 MTPA by 2030. And the outcome is going to depend basically on 3 different factors for all these countries. The first one is the evolution of domestic production, because a lot of these countries are actually either supplementing or replacing declining gas production, or they are replacing pipeline supplies. There is also a big uncertainty regarding the energy mix and what are going to be the decisions on nuclear, on coal, on renewable, and finally whether the infrastructure is going to be available and what will be the prices, the wholesale prices in the different countries compared to the prevailing LNG prices. But again, I mean, our main markets are going to be Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And even for these countries, I mean, we see a lot of uncertainties depending, well, for Japan, depending on the assumption you have on the growth of power demand, the use of gas in the industrial sector, what is going to be the evolution on nuclear, how much coal is going to continue to represent in terms of power supply, and the growth of renewable. Korea, well, Korea, I think, I mean, as you can see in red, this is a country where we were a little bit pessimistic, but we have since a few days a new government, and this new government will force us to change actually our outlook, because this new government seems to be very much less in favor of coal and nuclear and is turning to LNG and renewable. So in the long term, this is actually more in favor of additional LNG demand in Korea. However, in Taiwan, I mean, this is actually a completely different outlook. They are trying to phase out completely nuclear. They're still building a lot of additional coal-fired capacity and also trying to build some renewable, but we have there a much more optimistic outlook for Taiwan and for LNG. China, well, China is the elephant in the room. China and India are probably the most complicated countries when you're trying to understand what is going to be the evolution of their LNG demand. Everything is subject to big variations. I mean, very big variations. I remember a few years ago, 2012, the Chinese were talking about 400 BCM of natural gas demand by 2020. We will actually be happy if we reach 300 billion cubic meters. And in that, you also have to understand how the domestic gas production is going to evolve, because they have pretty much everything. They have conventional gas, they have shale gas, they have TBM, they have tight gas. So you have to come up with a solution regarding all these different factors. And they are also getting natural gas by pipeline from Central Asia, potentially from Russia, and also from Myanmar. So in between, you can cope with a lot of different scenarios for LNG demand, and these scenarios also can evolve depending on whether or not some additional pipeline capacity is coming online and when it's coming online. So you can see a lot of different variations. Another region which, of course, is of interest for Russia is what is happening in Europe. Well, Europe is a region which is probably not the most happy region for natural gas. It doesn't seem that our politicians particularly like natural gas. it's a fossil fuel, and it's also not always very competitive compared to coal-fired generation in the absence of a carbon price. And let's face it, I mean, the politicians in Europe, they really love renewable. So the growth of natural gas demand in Europe is not going to be very big, if it's growing at all, but in our scenarios, we still see a growth of natural gas demand in Europe. What is sure is that the need for additional gas imports in Europe is going to increase because natural gas production is declining, and even more so right now that we have all these issues with Groningen. You may have seen a few weeks ago, I mean, the Dutch minister actually decided to decline again the gas production for Groningen this year. So between 2013 and 2017, we have lost 30 billion cubic meters of gas production coming from Groningen. This is very big. But the outcome for LNG and for Russian pipeline gas in Europe doesn't only depend on these two variables, demand and production. It also depends on how much gas is going to come from North Africa. You cannot be very optimistic about North Africa. And also countries like Azerbaijan or potentially Middle Eastern countries. So everything together, well, we think that there could be a lot of different scenarios for LNG demand in Europe. But what we can see is that so far, the growth of LNG demand in Europe has been relatively muted. Why? For two reasons. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the growth of global LNG supply has not been that big in 2015 and 16, and also there has been demand from other regions. Well, these other regions are what I kind of call the niche markets. One of them is Latin America. Latin America is not a very, very big market, but we see that between the growth of energy demand and also between the growth of renewable, you need additional gas demand there, in particular in the power generation sector. However, the big thing that I want you to remember about Latin America is that for LNG markets, that means a lot of flexibility. In particular, in this country, which is represented here, Brazil. Brazil, you are 1 year in, 1 year out. Last year, for LNG in Brazil, it was a bad year. Why? Because we had a lot of rain. A lot of rain means a lot of hydro. And when you have hydro, well, you don't need that much of natural gas. However, the years you have a drought, well, you do need a lot of LNG, and you will have Petrobras hunting down on the global gas markets for LNG cargoes. And this is actually what created a big price spike in the beginning of 2014, sending the prices up to $20 per MMBTU, because the Latin Americans, not only Petrobras, but also Argentina, was looking for LNG. And there is another region which is also looking and which is also becoming more and more important for global LNG. This is Middle East and Africa. Well, that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, right? I mean, Middle East and Africa, they do have a lot of natural gas resources. Actually, altogether, they represent probably more than 50% of global proven gas reserves. But between very important and very rapidly increasing gas demand and slowing down of production, and the fact that the reserves are not always very well reported between the different countries, you have a lot of LNG importing countries. You actually have 5 LNG importing countries. You have 4 in the Middle East, and you have 1 in Africa. This is Egypt. These countries, I think, and this region is going to become a more and more important market, with the caveat that Egypt can actually maybe become again self-sufficient. But in the Middle East, we still have a lot of countries which will need additional gas because their demand is increasing very fast, and they actually prefer to import LNG rather than increase the wholesale gas prices too much to develop additional gas production. In Africa, well, Egypt is kind of the difficult country to forecast. Everybody anticipates that the LNG imports in Egypt are going to disappear pretty soon. However, I would like to say be careful about demand, because demand in Egypt has been artificially reduced because, in fact, you could have a lot of potential additional demand in the power generation sector and also in the industrial sector where the gas supplies have been cut. But besides Egypt, you do have a lot of countries, and remember my map that I was showing before, I mean, you have a lot of countries which are interested in natural gas and in LNG imports. The last sector and the last part of demand that I want to touch upon is transport. And I know that this is quite popular here in Russia. We do see some prospects for natural gas use in transport, for LNG use in transport, in particular for heavy-duty trucks, but also for the maritime sector. But for these sectors, I mean, there are two things which are really important. There is the environmental aspect, and there is also the economics. And if you are looking at the respective volumes, I mean, actually the maritime sector makes a lot of sense because one ferry, for example, this is the equivalent of 1,300 buses and actually the equivalent of about 10,000 taxis. However, economics do not always make sense, and the problem is that the shipping industry is very, very conservative. So for me, this is a major hurdle for LNG to basically grow in that sector unless there is a lot of support from the different governments because of the environmental aspect. Now, I've been talking a lot about demand, but the supply is also equally important. And here, as you all know, we have a lot of supply coming to the market, and as I explained, we have already seen a lot of gas coming from Australia, from the US, and we have a lot more coming, and then what? And then what? Because we need about 5 years in general, maybe 4 or maybe a little bit less if you have an FLNG, to bring an LNG liquefaction on stream. And if we are not taking regularly final investment decision on this new capacity, well, we are facing the risk here of having not enough LNG. And do not forget one thing. I mean, while we are adding new capacity, there are also some countries which are no longer going to export LNG in a few years from now. Take Abu Dhabi, for example. Their contract is going to expire in 2019. Are they going to continue running their plant, which was one of the first ones in the 70s? Maybe. Maybe not. Same question for Oman, same question for Indonesia, same question for Trinidad. And if you start adding up all these countries, you realize that, hey, if you want to actually meet your high growth of LNG demand, you will need some final investment decision to be taken rapidly if we want to continue meeting LNG demand in the future. So I'm going to look at a few regions. And, well, of course, the first of all is Australia. So Australia, as I said, already pretty much engaged in the growth of LNG supply with some hurdles. You may know about Gorgon, which beautifully arrived with 1.5 years of delay. Started, stopped, started, stopped. A lot of problems. Also, the LNG trains in Gladstone, so in the eastern part of Australia, are facing some issues. They are currently facing also some domestic market obligations from the government. That is the first time in history that we are seeing that, specifically in Australia, where they like to have the market working. So what does that say for Australia? Well, these projects have been very expensive, and honestly, we are not seeing a lot of additional projects coming in Australia, maybe some brownfield projects if you're really, really optimistic. But really, I mean, this is, if you're really, really optimistic, maybe an additional 20 MTPA, but this is definitely not the regions where we expect to see a lot of additional LNG. However, I mean, one big question mark is about North America. I mean, North America, US and Canada together, if you want to add up all the projects, you have more than 600 MTPA of additional projects. Well, yeah, that's very good on the paper. We already have more than 65 MTPA, which is already operating or under construction. And they are going to ramp up to capacity. They operate very well, and the impact is already felt on the global LNG market. But the situation is completely different now from the situation when these projects took FID. When the project took FID, prices in Asia were at $16 per MMBTU. So when you have $4 per MMBTU in the US, yes, it does make sense to export LNG to Asia. But we do not have that kind of market conditions right now. So it's going to be interesting to see to what extent new FIDs are going to be taken in the United States. And I know US developers are very bullish on a new LNG capacity, but my question is, okay, you are exporting right now, and sometimes you are covering your capital cost, what we are calling now sunk cost. But imagine you are going to your bank and you are saying, yes, I am exporting to Europe, so Europe is about 6, but I'm covering all my variable costs, so the cost of the molecule, plus the transport cost, plus the regasification cost, and your bank is going to say, yeah, but what about the capital cost? Or that sunk cost? Well, that may be not sunk costs for your bank. That's my key question for the additional investments in LNG capacity, in particular in the United States. Russia, well, it's a bit difficult for me to present on Russia because, I mean, everybody here might know much more than I do. Yamal LNG, obviously, is going to start operating soon. I mean, we had our friend from Novatech presenting the latest development at the Flame conference on Yamal LNG. From a personal point of view, I think the most obvious project is definitely the expansion of Sakhalin. There are other projects which are also very interesting. It's also a question of economic cost. I mean, Russia has a lot of potential, but also a lot of internal and external hurdles, including, I mean, access to finance. And finally, another region that I have a lot of interest in, because I happen to also be working on other projects on that, this is East Africa. As you might know, a lot of gas has been discovered in Africa. A lot of gas has been discovered in Mozambique, and actually very recently, since 2010, Mozambique and Tanzania have appeared on the gas and LNG scene. So far, no FID has been taken. We do expect, however, to have an FID taken on an FLNG project, which is sponsored by Eni, Coral FLNG. But for me, the very important and interesting part to be developed in Mozambique is a big gas field which is between two areas owned by Anadarko and Eni. This is a field called Prosperidad or Mamba. And this is about 70 TCF. It's a big gas field. And I mean, this is really where the prize is in this region. And also, Mozambique is definitely ahead of Tanzania in that kind of development. Actually, so much ahead that in my very low scenario, you see that actually I see a case where you have no LNG development at all in Tanzania. But there is prospect, however, to use the gas domestically. So where does that leave us? I mean, which projects are going to come forward? Cost will be king. That's for sure. So the projects which are going to move ahead are the projects which are the most competitive. We are talking about brownfield expansions. The project which took FID last year was Tangguh third train, brownfield expansion. Qatar, hey, they just lifted the moratorium. That's interesting. I mean, obviously, people can actually come with debottlenecking quite fast to the market, and they are definitely the most competitive by far. One caveat, though, it's not sure that all that gas which has been lifted by the moratorium will go as LNG. Do not forget that they have also signed an agreement with the Emirates to expand the Dolphin gas pipeline, which is running from Qatar to the Emirates and then to Oman. Please keep that in mind. But definitely brownfield expansions. Also, projects with strategic involvement from buyers. Also with strategic involvement from the government. If the government can give you an advantage in terms of taxes, in terms of like the wood fiber project, which is getting electricity at reduced rates from the government in Canada, that's also quite an advantage. Projects with a lot of liquids, and potentially FLNG, especially the FLNG projects which are coming from the conversion of existing vessels into FLNG. Not done yet, but this is what we are trying to do for Cameroon FLNG, for example. And there will be a lot of unhappy people because, after all, we have about 1,000 MTPA of projects which are planned. So not everybody is going to be successful. And those who have any kind of hurdle, remote locations, or problematic or difficult fiscal framework, uncertain regulation, any kind of problems is going to move you on the back burner. So that's quite important to keep that in mind. But that's the kind of supply and demand dynamics. We have also a lot of things which are happening on the contractual framework and on the dynamics in the global LNG market. This is the growth of what we call spot and short-term LNG. Short-term means contracts of a duration of less than 4 years. And this has been growing quite regularly over the past 20 years. It has been growing for different reasons, both on the supply side, so for example, ramp-up volumes, but also uncommitted or spare LNG. LNG supply which was committed to a market like the United States, for example, but then redirected to other location, or portfolio LNG. We have a lot of portfolio LNG, you know, these people like Shell, etc., which are aggregating but not always have the contract back-to-back on the secondary sales. And we have also had a lot of developments on the demand side. We have had liberalization effects, notably in Europe and also in the US. I mean, we have had the creation of hubs, the third-party access, the end of the final destination clauses, the fact that the regasification capacity has grown so much compared to liquefaction, the fact also that, how can I say, the nature of the buyers has changed. Now we have gas and power companies, and these gas and power companies are facing the competition from the other guys. So, for example, if you're a European or even a Japanese utility right now, you cannot only think about the future of gas. You have to think about the future of gas in the context of competition with the next guy. So you have to be competitive. That's why this spot and short-term LNG has been growing so much. And it's not easy. I mean, I know here we are a supplier's market, I mean, in Russia, obviously, but I have sympathy for the buyer because they don't know where they are going. What they want a lot of different things. They want the end of final destination clauses. They want to move away from oil indexation. They want to have more flexible LNG. Why? Well, because between all the uncertainties regarding demand, between the liberalization processes, they have no idea what is going to happen, what will be their demand in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. And all these things are going to put pressure on the suppliers. Well, first of all, to remove the final destination clauses, and I think this is definitely one aspect of the long-term contracts which is going to disappear. Japan is very much against that and is making a lot of efforts to move that away, to have that disappearing away from the long-term contracts. They also want to move away from oil indexation. Maybe not the end of oil indexation, but you may actually find that Asian buyers want to have a more diversified portfolio. Little bit of oil indexation, a little bit of hub indexation with NBP and Hub, but maybe one day an Asian trading hub, if that does exist. And also, I mean, there is a growth of uncommitted LNG. There are a lot more portfolio players which have LNG. And very important, I mean, there is less and less willingness for those buyers who are going to have expiring contract to extend these contracts. If you are a Japanese or a Korean buyer right now, you may actually think, hey, why should I actually extend my contract? I have no idea about my future demand, and there is a lot of spot energy around. So, you know, I can just go shopping and keep about that in terms of long-term contracts, have a little bit of short-term and have a little bit of spot. And this is exactly what JERA here is saying. JERA, very, very important buyer. That's about 40 MTPA altogether. This is our first buyer in the market, Mr. Hiroki Sato, VP of LNG contracts. Very important guy, probably the most important guy you want to follow on the global LNG market. What he says is very important, and this is their strategy. We want to keep some long-term contracts, but we want also be able to adapt to the changes in global gas and LNG markets. And what we anticipate is that there will be a growth of spot and short-term LNG. The global LNG markets are going to become more and more flexible because of all the factors that I have listed. And this is going to put some pressure on the global gas contracts and on the future of the long-term contracts. But this is also creating some uncertainties because how do you finance your projects if you do not have a full coverage with long-term contracts? Because the big hurdle is not so much the suppliers these days, it's the banks. The banks, they have not integrated yet. They start to talk about it, but they have not integrated yet the changes in global energy market. Something also that not that many people are talking about, although when you ask them, they start to integrate that. Shipping. You know the thing between liquefaction and regas, you know, the cargoes which are moving around. Well, there is a lot of inefficiency there. For example, you may have a cargo which is moving from the US and goes to Singapore. At the same time, you have another cargo which moves from Qatar and goes to Europe. That's not very efficient in terms of fuel consumption, in terms of the number of days traveled, in terms of CO2 emission, in terms of pretty much everything, including the cost of transport. And we have now very low margins. So let's imagine, for example, by 2020, which is the modeling that we have done here, we try to optimize. We try to have them going to the nearest destination without taking into account to whom belongs the cargo. Well, that's about $2 billion efficiency for 1 year. That's the equivalent of $0.1 per MMBtu. Not that much, but I'm sure some people will definitely be interested in that. And when you talk to the different guys individually, they're already optimizing, they're already using software to optimize individually. And there is no mystery that, for example, RasGas and Qatargas, they have merged operations because they have a big fleet. This is about almost 80 MTPA of capacity. So they are already optimizing. But the key question is, are we going to start having people optimizing their cargoes between themselves? GAIL, for example, the Indian company, is saying, hey, I'm interested in swapping. I have some US LNG. Is anybody interested in getting my US LNG and giving me another cargo coming from a destination coming from Qatar, maybe? So you see things are starting to change on the market. Optimization is going to be very important in the following years. Also, something which is very important is the price information. Right now, a lot of the pricing mechanisms in the LNG world is dominated by oil indexation. But it started to change in Asia because there is a lot of pressure to move to something else. But something else, like trading hubs, doesn't exist in Asia. So you would have probably some kind of very patchy framework during the next 10 years where you can have Henry Hub indexation, NBP indexation, maybe some indices like GKM, which already exist before and if we ever have a true Asian trading hub. But in the meantime, also because people want to optimize their portfolio, I think we will have a patchwork of different oil indexations. And the thing is, you have to be very careful on what is going to be the best indexation for you, depending on where the prices are. And of course, Henry Hub indexation was making a lot of sense a few years ago when we were looking at $14, $16 per MMBtu. But now, Henry Hub indexation, it's kind of complicated. It's not always within the money, and this is exactly your problem. You can see here at $30 or $50 per MMBtu, you need to have Henry Hub. Okay, well, we are not far from here, but you need to have Henry Hub staying at very low gas prices in order to be competitive. So the attractiveness of Henry Hub still somehow there, but not as prevalent as before. Now, I have been talking for a long time about hub indexation developing in Asia. There is still some interest, notably in 3 countries, China, Japan, and Singapore. But it's going to take time because we are not starting from the same point as Europe. In Europe, when the hubs developed, we already had, to some extent, some liberalized gas market. We had third-party access already existing. We had liberalization of gas prices. Apart from Singapore, we do not have these conditions in place in many Asian markets. So it's going to take a lot of time. So keep that in mind. The IEA, where I was before, has only started to talk about that in 2013. We are only in 2017. There are a lot of progress which is being made. In China, they're also talking about unbundling the network and potentially giving third-party access to LNG terminals, but we are not there yet. However, I mean, there is definitely some changes. It doesn't mean that whatever we will create in terms of prices, that we are going to have exactly the same framework for the different countries. I mean, in Singapore, you may have some kind of more LNG trading location. In China, which has a lot of gas coming from different places, you can have a price which is reflecting the different sources of supply between domestic gas production, pipeline gas, and also LNG supplies. And in Japan, you may have a kind of hybrid price with the different indexation. So you may not always have only one price or one kind of price formula. But there are changes coming. Nobody really knows where these changes are going to lead them, but changes are definitely there. So where does that leave us? I think for all the companies involved in the LNG market now, they have to adapt to an environment which is completely different from what they were expecting only 3 years ago. They have to change the way they are operating, in particular in terms of cost. I mean, the 2011-2014 period where people were really not really caring about how much it was going to cost, this is over. Now, you need to be competitive and you need to be affordable. Because you remember all those markets that I've been talking about. You need to deliver a product which is going to be affordable for the developing market. You need to be competitive against coal, because very often the externalities of coal are not taken into account. So if you want to basically make inroads into the markets in India, in Southeast Asia, where affordability is very important, you need to be competitive, you need to be affordable. So you have a lot of potential new markets, but this will be absolutely crucial for the gas industry to be successful. There will be changes in terms of pricing formulas, there will be adaptation, there will be a lot of innovation. Buyers are very innovative when it comes to find out, I mean, how a project or how a formula in a long-term contract can evolve. I have done my share of arbitration. Sky is the limit in terms of what people can invent. Projects, existing projects and new projects will also have to adapt to the new buyer's requirement, especially right now that we are in a buyer market. But the key question at the end of the day is going to be, how do you take final investment decision if you do not always have the full coverage? And this will be a key question. And maybe at some point we are going to see final investment decision being taken on an LNG project with a less than 50% coverage with LNG contracts. But for that, you need, I think, a lot of things to happen. You need to lower your costs. You need also to have liquid LNG market. And you need to have the banks accepting that the market has changed and they are willing to take additional risks. Because otherwise, I mean, we may very well end up in a situation where even the contracts entity is at risk. And that people are saying, well, you know what? I mean, it's time to renegotiate because I can't pay anymore. And this is a situation that, I mean, we have not seen the contract being completely cancelled, but we have also experienced in Europe a period where all the buyers said, sorry, can't do. I am going to be bankrupt. We need to renegotiate our long-term contracts. Remember this absolutely great period, 2009, 2011. This may be also coming in Asia and globally. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you learned a lot. And of course, I am willing to take any questions on pretty much anything, except the Saudi Aramco IPO. I am not answering any question. I have no idea.
Andrei Kovalov, Higher School of Economics. You said cost is going to be a decisive factor for the energy market. And where do you see the potential for cutting down cost of this market? Thank you.
I think the gas and LNG companies have already understood that, there is something to be done, and they are already reducing costs, and they are becoming more innovative. After that, you have more opportunities in terms of modularization, or as I was mentioning, there is something to investigate, which is having FLNG, but not based specifically and designed for one specific field, like Prelude from Shell, for example, but having something more standardized, like the initiative that Golar is taking for projects like Equatorial Guinea or Cameroon. But again, we do not have any feedback on how well these projects are going to operate, so this is kind of new territory. However, I can already see that all the LNG companies have understood no more Gorgon with $54 billion and plus 50% cost overrun. No, that's out of question. You need to be affordable now.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We actually need it urgently. So I would like to ask about the perspectives of Indian LNG market. You've said that it is another as Chinese LNG market. Another question, another big question for global energy market. Would you please describe a little bit the main factors for Indian LNG demand growth? And I am really interested in another question. Could you please describe some perspectives for indigenous consumption of new African gas producers? So, what are the range of their own gas production that will come to their own market? So will they actually be new economical growth that will happen because of this new fields development? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, about 3 weeks ago, I spent an entire week in India, and it's a challenging market. Prime Minister Modi wants to develop a new gas-based economy. However, when you ask people, you really wonder, what is behind this gas-based economy? Okay, where do you want to develop natural gas demand? And pretty much everybody I talked to said, in the power generation sector, this is actually very difficult because we have coal, which is very cheap, and we have solar, which is growing and is becoming more and more affordable. So even though with solar, we will need a little bit of flexibility, the case for this flexibility is not guaranteed. So you do not find actually a very optimistic case for natural gas demand growth in the power generation sector. The second big gas consumer in India is the fertilizer sector. And here as well, there are some perspectives for growth, but this is also an extremely price-sensitive sector. Actually, the problem for the gas industry in India is that it has been historically based on the two sectors which are the most price-sensitive, power and fertilizers. There are a lot of other regions where you have also used the industrial sector or the residential sector as a growing market, and they can accept, slightly higher prices depending on what the alternative is. There is a whole discussion in India on what should be the first. Should it be the pipeline or should it be demand? The overall answer, sure, believe me, because the problem is, okay, I don't know to what extent you know the history of the Indian gas market, but in 22 they discovered a big gas field, Krishna Godavari KGD6, big gas field. It was expected to produce about 30 BCM per year. It's big for India. It may not be big for Russia, but for India, it was going to double their natural gas production. And the first month of the production of Krishna Godavari were great. it was going through the roof. Everybody was happy. And then the production did that. And now it produces, maybe about 5 billion cubic meters per year. So it's a huge disappointment. And it's an even bigger disappointment for those who actually sign up for that production. So Krishna Godavari is in the eastern part of India. most of the demand in India is actually on the western part, from Gujarat up to Delhi. This is where it has been developed originally because of the historical gas production. Reliance, which was the operator of the gas field, has built a pipeline, which these days is not obviously very utilized. So, there is that question. I mean, we have a gas pipeline, but we have a lot of underutilization of the gas pipeline. So should we take the risk of building the gas pipeline and then it's not utilized? Or should we wait for demand to basically say, hi, I'm here? Well, the answer is, I mean, you kind of need to develop, the supply and the carrier first, but they need also to identify where demand would be. I have not found, when I was discussing in India, a lot of analysis on how much industrial demand could really come or could be targeted, which is very interesting because at the same time you have this Make in India development, the new policy of the government. And there is also a lot of interest in another part, which is CDG, city gas distribution. Also there, some interest, but I mean, there is also some issues because, I mean, you need to develop the gas network in order to reach not only the households for cooking, but also the commercial, etc. And not that many people are actually doing that. I mean, there are a lot of inertia from the regulatory point of view. So I come back from India thinking it's going to be a difficult market. And it's also a market where you have a lot of subsidies, some of which have been removed, where the taxation is, frankly, extremely complicated. So there are a lot of issues to be solved first in order for natural gas to find its place in India. But I'm not quite sure that the place in India is going to be in the power generation sector unless you are taking into account the externalities of coal and unless there is a way to basically encourage the gas to play a role in the flexibility of the power generation sector. So this is also determining a lot of the outlook for LNG, with a caveat. As I mentioned, a lot of the growth which has happened in India has actually happened on the western part. In the eastern part, there is almost nothing. But, I mean, India, this is a huge market with a lot of population. And there is some potential to develop, I mean, the gas there and the gas demand there. But people need to talk to each other. Because down in the western coast of India, you have a beautiful LNG terminal. So the LNG terminal is there. But there is no pipeline to evacuate the gas. Because, strangely enough, for some reason that I do not understand, you do not have discussion between the guys who are doing the pipe and the guys who are doing the LNG terminal. So obviously, you're not going very well. Africa. Okay, I have a very personal interest in Africa. I've been going to many countries in Africa, backpack, etc. It's going to be 2 billion people by 2040. There is a lot of energy poverty there. There is a lot of not access to clean cooking as well. There will be some mega cities with potential issues of local air pollution. Yes, I understand. I mean, I agree. Renewable has a big role to play in Africa because especially if you are trying to target the rural areas, I mean, you need something which can address these kind of pockets of demand. But I think there is also a role for gas to play in Africa. Not only in terms of imports of gas, and I've written a whole paper that is available on the KAPSARC website on LNG imports for Africa, but also because you have a lot of resources there. However, you need to create and aggregate the demand, and this is a big problem. I mean, in terms of power generation, usually when you are developing power plants, I mean, it's small capacity. Utilities are facing a lot of issues in terms of financial issues. I mean, a lot of countries have actually very low credit rating. So there is a need of the support from the financial institutions to help tackle this energy poverty, to help tackle all these issues in terms of access to clean cooking, and in order to develop Africa, not only in terms of access to electricity, but also industrialization. And I think natural gas has a role to play along with other energy resources.
Adeni Adebayo from New Gas Technologies. My question is sort of related to one of the points you made about sort of generally about the Southeastern Asian markets. And I just wanted to pick your head on what you think about Bangladesh, Pakistan. So we have this fragmentation of the LNG markets all across the world. And the volumes and the timing of these markets sort of vary in terms of some places it's pretty much plug and play. And in some places you need to build everything from scratch. And the question is, do you think this momentum in terms of the fact that we have a buyer's market at the moment, the way for companies to get into the market is possibly by collaborating towards more advocacy and sort of touting this, the merits of LNG over all the sources, for example, or you see some other ways for people to break into those developing emerging markets?
I think the case for Pakistan and Bangladesh is very special because these countries already use a lot of natural gas in the sectors. They are one of the few countries which are using a lot of natural gas in transport, for example. They have a record number of NGVs. They are using natural gas in the industry, in the power generation sector. So at least, making the case or developing infrastructure is less a problem there. The problem for them is that their production, because they were before only depending on their domestic gas production. Production is there, the potential demand is there. And this is basically the problem. They have been looking at alternatives, especially Pakistan has been looking at coal with a little bit of difficulties. Bangladesh, I understand, is still looking a little bit at coal. But they are going to LNG because this is the easier solution. Also in Pakistan, you had somebody who was very much in favor of LNG. So, this person made it work. But FSRU is also, floating storage and regasification units are also a relatively cheap way and very easy and rapid way to get access to LNG, especially right now that you have a buyer's market. And the Pakistanis are, quite remarkably very good at negotiating their LNG contracts. What they got from the different sellers is, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. I don't know whether the Bangladeshi will do that well. But as I said, these countries are very specific in the region, and you do not have that very tough competition between coal and natural gas that I would see in other countries like Indonesia, even Malaysia, which has been for a very long time a very gassy country, is now building a lot of coal-fired plants. Vietnam, the same thing. Philippines is a bit hesitating as well, and this is a huge country with 100 million inhabitants, and they need a lot of capacity. And you have this very tough competition there because, of affordability. Affordability is going to be crucial for natural gas to have success in Asia.
Mikhail Krutykhin, Rusenergy. We keep hearing a lot of conflicting opinions about the prospects of competition between piped gas and LNG in Europe. I would like to hear your opinion here.
And you are located next to the right guy because Vitaly and I wrote a paper on that. Will there be a price war between US LNG and Russian pipeline gas in Europe? But at the very beginning, I wanted to call from Russia with love. But my boss decided that it was a little bit too much. The most important part to understand is that there will be competition if and only if there is excess LNG on the global gas market, on the global LNG market. And this is the reason why so far we've been fine, because the growth of LNG supply hasn't been that big and has been easily absorbed in 2016 by China, by India, by Egypt, Pakistan, and all these new developing countries. And as long as this additional growth can be absorbed by all these other countries, and a little bit can come back to Europe, because in Europe, you have gas demand growing a little bit and production definitely going down. So this is, the additional demand is leaving room for both gas pipeline from Russia and other regions, and also LNG to be absorbed. So as long as this statu quo is existing, this is fine. We only have a problem in the case of a rapid increase in supply, in LNG supply, that I do not really see happening right now. I mean, there will be a rapid increase in LNG supply in 2018 and 19 because a lot of capacity is coming at that time. But it's not like people absolutely want to come to the market right now because it's a kind of a difficult market. And the second thing is if there is not enough demand on everywhere else, both in Japan, etc. So if you have a combination, for example, of very warm winters in the whole of Asia, and if you have a lot of hydro in Brazil, and all these conditions are reunited, yeah, I mean, maybe there will be a lot of excess gas coming back to Europe. So that's the key question. And then the second thing is what is happening within Europe in terms of supply and demand. Demand, I mean, if prices are going down, you may have some additional demand in the power generation sector. Well, okay, the upside is not huge, but you can have a little bit more demand. And then, I mean, the question is, okay, how are we doing in terms of the other sources of supply? But there might be a case, if all these things are reunited, that indeed you have too much gas for Europe and Russian pipeline gas. And they are both, I mean, the additional LNG which could be coming back to Europe would basically risk crowding out Russian pipeline gas. It's a potential scenario. Then the question is, what would Russia do? I mean, part of the Russian pipeline contracts, I mean, is already contracted. But there is a part which is sold on spot prices, and this is where we have a little bit of variability. So is Russia going to be proactive or reactive? And again, this depends on the relative level of prices of both pipeline gas from Russia and Russian LNG. Because there is a level for US LNG which is a kind of threshold. If they cannot cover their variable cost, then could they actually shut in production? And variable cost is basically Henry Hub plus a little bit, transport and regas. And that's for them the threshold.
Okay, one more provocative question.
Okay.
So with this Qatari move to lift up the moratorium, which amazingly coincided with the Russian announcement on its ambitions on the LNG market. So do you see any conspiracies here? Do you see any... first of all, what do you think is the driving force for Qatar? Why they, after 10 years, 12 years, how long did it take them? They suddenly decided to review their attitude. And then do you foresee any serious competition between, let's say, US LNG, Qatar LNG, which could have some geopolitical context, not just market competition, or you think it will be invisible hand of the market and nothing else? What is your opinion?
Well, after 12 years of moratorium, it's about time. I think people were really wondering, is there a problem with the North Field of war? Well, maybe there is a little bit of, the Russians want to become number one. And, I mean, being number one, being the largest exporter of LNG, I think is also very important, in your own opinion of yourself. Maybe this is also driving that. And there is also some very nice country on the other side of the sea, which is actually sharing, this gas, the big gas fields, the North Field, South Part. So that may be also one thing. And you remember my graphic with future LNG supply? Well, if Qatar is debottlenecking, and they said they could easily debottleneck 6 of their trains, so that's about 12 MTPA. If we have 12 MTPA coming to the market by the early 2020, this is good, because that may actually prevent our big market squeeze. So thank you, Qatar. I think given that they are by far, the kind of low suppliers, because upstream costs are very low, and it's going to be brownfield project because it's debottlenecking. They are going to be able to come at the very lowest cost. So I think for them it's a great move. One caveat though, I am not sure whether all this lifting of moratorium is going to be 100% dedicated to LNG, or it's going to be a lot of LNG, but also potentially a little bit of dolphin gas pipeline expansion. That's my only question mark on that.
And what would be your bet on Iranian LNG showing up on the market? I mean, let's say in the next 5 years.
In the next 5 years, I mean, for me, the easiest way is to build a pipeline to Oman and to use the underutilized liquefaction plants in Oman. That's, for me, the easiest thing to do, and Oman is the GCC country which has had the best relationship with Iran, and we have been talking about this potential pipeline for many years now. For me, this is the easiest way. Otherwise, I mean, like any big project, you know, liquefaction means, well, you have financing. I mean, we are not there yet in terms of bringing a lot of financing. You have the access to the technology. Again, I mean, is any Western company willing to take that risk? You need to find clients, etc. So 5 years, given that the construction of any LNG plant, and I know they have already started and they have some storage tanks, etc., but the rest is still to be done. That's a bit challenging.
Thank you.
Unless one thing, unless there is a very small-scale liquefaction plant which was supposed to go to Colombia, the Caribbean FLNG, so 0.5 MTPA. If anybody is interested to develop a stranded gas field, there is one which is available for anybody if you want. You know, it's small. Can be the garden.
My question to you will be to provoke you for your wishful thinking maybe, or for your vision of the ideal model of the market of my country, which is Russia. I do understand that if we look a little bit into the future, I will see the gas market in my country in a slightly different mode. And I would like to ask you, I will explain some of these parameters of this new vision, and I will ask you then maybe to give your vision. What do you think is incorrect in this, and what are the major challenges and major maybe barriers to reach this with the increasing role of LNG? I like very much that somebody was raising this issue of the small LNG, and I definitely think that maybe since my country is quite big and the density of population is quite low, there are some natural barriers for further expansion of gasification of my country through the pipeline gas, increasing capital intensity, etc. So there is definitely a niche for LNG, and I will say for the small LNG, because mega LNG projects are for big industrial, maybe consumers, but if we're speaking about the populations, for the households, here I see a good opportunity in my country, maybe also in the Europe as an export market, rivers, roads, big cities, small villages, usually in some cases they have both a river and a road. In case of my country, sometimes no road at all, but access to these places through the rivers. And I do understand that maybe in this case, small LNG, if technological advances will go further and the learning curve and cost curve will go down, the opportunity for this will be to cover demand for gas, at least in the households, in the small provincial cities. I just came today from Tverskaya Oblast to 130 kilometers from Moscow. A lot of wood is used in the villages, not only for cooking, but for heating as well. So to substitute this, maybe small LNG might be good in such cities like Uglichka, Lyazin, Kashin, etc., this upper Volga River, and then bunkering of the ships, not only marine ships, but the river ships. That's also the market. And big cities who are staying located on these rivers provide some demand from the municipal transport, for instance, buses, etc. So I see different elements of potential demand which might be covered by LNG. Here we're coming to the natural question, what prevents this, and we're coming to the institutional structure, etc., etc. So if, for instance, this perception, my perception, so I refer to all the mistakes in these perceptions personally to me, maybe it's not only mine, but if we'll take this perception as one of the potential pictures how the gas markets can be organized. What from your point of view are the major challenges? What are major barriers? How you will see the necessary demand to change the institutional structure? I do understand that definitely not three companies like Gazprom, Rosneft, and Novatek need to be the only players there. Like in the oil market, it needs to be the mega companies, small and medium one, etc., etc. So how you will see in your crystal ball the well-balanced, organized structure of such market with the role of LNG, not related only to few mega plants, but to further involvement of the small LNG in the different parts of the energy balance, including the households, including in the transport, in municipal transport, etc., etc. So can you think a little bit like Herbert Wells who came to Moscow and was asking the Kremlin dreamer to dream a little bit, and then one of these dreams was the railroad plan, etc., etc. So can you dream a little bit about the vision of the LNG in Russia according to these lines that I was trying to explain very briefly? Can you please?
I mean, I think it's
As a personal favor for me.
it's an investment case, basically. I mean, okay, so you are looking at a city. Where is the gas supply? I mean, maybe there is gas supply nearby. So you want to understand, I mean, basically, is there demand for that natural gas? So you want to investigate what are the different potential. Do we have potential, easy potential, in, for example, the industrial sector where you could switch? Do we have also an easy potential in the transport sector where, on top of that, I mean, the city or the government of the region will have an interest in switching and encouraging switching from oil products, so whatever the buzz are running on, and to LNG. How easy also to convert the houses to natural gas, because I mean this is not something that you want to make immediately. But the first thing to do is basically to find anchor customers, because you want to have enough volumes in order to basically do the development, and then expand with additional demand, smaller demand. But at the end of the day, I mean the question is the cost. At what price can you offer your product? Also in terms of smaller scale, I mean, there are some developments, and I will invite you to look at, the providers, for example. I mean, I think GE is doing a lot of work on the smaller scale solution. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's really an investment potential. You have to look for where your demand would be and make sure that your demand will be there and that the customer is really interested, especially the large ones, the ones which are really make your case work. And then look also hand in hand with the government in order to convince the parts which are kind of depending on political will. So transport, which usually I assume would be run by municipalities, and also the residential consumption, and potentially also administrative buildings.
Thank you, Ann-Sofi. One last but probably the most challenging question. So I know you worked as a consultant, so let's imagine situation. You are invited by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin
Sure.
to consult him on Russia's LNG strategy. So we here in Russia quite frequently complain that, okay, we've lost our window of opportunity, we were too slow to develop our LNG, and you know all the painful stories about our LNG development. So, but okay, here we are, and here is the LNG market dynamics, which you've described. What do you think would be the most reasonable and efficient Russian strategy in the LNG market, given that we are like in a perfect world?
Okay, I don't quite remember the respective cost dynamics of the different LNG projects, but you remember my slide on which projects are going to move forward. Cost is king. So which one of your projects is going to be the best, considering also the transport dynamics, etc.? I think probably the third train of Sakhalin, because it's brownfield and because it's also located next to these big markets. I mean China, etc. It's at least located in Asia. So I think my advice is, okay, you look first for the best one, and then also you look at the next ones also in terms of proximity to a market and also in terms of cost dynamics.
Cool. Thank you.